Hello lovely people and welcome back to Level Up Corner. Today we're going to talk about an interesting article that Wizards put out. It's an article on diversity and how they're going to try to incorporate more diversity in D&D, which on its surface looks good. It seems like a noble goal that they should be aspiring for. But how they're going about it is they're going to take away the evil in some races, like Drow and Orcs as they gave for examples. And there are a few problems with this when you look more into the concept of taking away evil from these races. And we really need to dive into this and figure out if this is a good idea or a not so good idea and discuss it throughout the video. Now, the first thing that we need to keep in mind is that in D&D, there are different species and races. There are sub-races like hill dwarves and mountain dwarves, whatever, but there are different species as well that they're talking about. For example, an elf does not need to sleep like a human does. There are biological differences. An elf just needs to meditate. Elves also live longer. Dwarves are stumpier and hardier, and they have biological differences in it. There are also possibly other differences as well. For example, why are dwarves so typically stubborn? Do they have something different in their biology? For example, we as humans do get enjoyment through certain self-destructive things like gambling or other stuff like that. Dwarves could get a sense of pride and enjoyment from just their work more so than we would as humans. Why? Well, they're different species. They are biologically completely different. So when you try to attribute the idea of race in our real world for race in D&D, it's not a fair comparison because race in D&D is actually more species. It's just completely different. It's like comparing apples to oranges. Now for that, there are even further concepts that make it more interesting. In D&D, there are evil things. In our world, there's just animals, which are neutral, and there are humans, which are either good or, if you're a bit more pessimistic, neutral. In D&D, there are devils, there are evil gods, and there are evil entities. Now, in our world, we have no idea what a truly evil species or being would look like. We can say that, yes, there are some cutthroat and evil people in the world, but nothing along the line of species or gods or anything else. And that makes the world so much more interesting. We can explore a different facet that we never would be able to in our real world. And these evil gods also can shape it in an interesting way. To deny that gods exist in D&D is like saying that in our real world, you know, the earth is just flat. And if anyone says that, well, we can all laugh at them together, just like how anyone would laugh at a person who says that gods don't exist in D&D. And since gods do exist, they have an impact in the world. The impact that they have for different cultures and races is that they might have been able to create these races in some lore, or other races follow these gods. Now, if you are created by or follow an evil god, how is that going to affect you? It's probably going to make you evil, jaded, or something else along those terms. And in doing so, you get your evil races. Now, they say that they want to make races more complex by taking away the evil in them. Well, we've already established that it's something new and fascinating that we don't have in our real world, which is already another level of complexity. But if you look at these evil races, I would actually argue and state that they are far more complex and interesting than the good or neutral races that we have in D&D. Take humanity, for example. If a DM starts to explain humanity to their players, generally it's, there's the law and a mayor and a king maybe and possibly some guilds. Cool. That's it. It's not very interesting. They can go into it a little bit more, but they don't go into it nearly as much as they do for the evil societies because they have to explain the evil societies. The evil societies are so different from ours that it requires a more complex explanation. For example, let's take the Drow. If you look at drow society, you see on the first layer that it is a social caste system. That's already far different than anything else that humanity or elves have. They might have social status, but it's not a social caste where you are born as a priest or you are born as a female priest and therefore you will always have a higher status than a male of any sort. It's matriarchal, it's also strange. There are many different facets that make it interesting in that culture. You then break it down. In each social caste, there are also different levels of social hierarchy and social power. So for example, we said that if someone could have a better social status, well, even if you are in the same social caste, your social status can differ. For example, an archmage versus a accomplished wizard. The archmage is going to have a higher social status, obviously. So it already has as much complexity and diversity that other human societies would have, but with a social caste system. And each individual views their society different. They don't just blindly follow it by saying, oh yeah, evil, great, yeah, this is wonderful. No, there are people who are oppressed and they want to work against that society. People have different opinions. Well, those of that species have different opinions on how things should be dealt with and view their ways in completely different lives. You go into the next layer of it and you go to an outpost that's not a drow capital and you find out that they have completely different opinions and possibly even cultures than what the normal drow would have. You take this to orcs. Orcs are extremely nomadic. It's not our standard way of life. And in order to be nomadic, they have to have things that are different. They have to have different viewpoints, and especially based on where they are. Some orcs may be nomadic in a tundra. Some orcs may be nomadic in a desert, while others are nomadic in a nice green grassland. Why are they nomadic in a fertile farmland area? Why? It makes it interesting cultural introspective that you can do. It makes the world more interesting, more complex, and have more depth. But at the same point, you might be wondering, Wizzo, what about if I want to play a character? Do they have to be evil? And the answer is, in 5e and in previous versions, honestly, no. The player gets to choose their own alignment, which means that it creates an interesting story. Sam Riegel, in Critical Role, has a very interesting story about how he is a good goblin, but all goblins are still terrible. How does that work out? I'm not going to spoil it, but you'll have to check that out. If you look at the old-fashioned Drizzt Do'Urden books, it takes a completely different look at it, where you have this good drow. How is this drow good? What journey did he have to take? Was he naturally good? Are all drow somewhat good or bad based on their role in society and culture? It makes a huge introspective as well, that it lets the player explore and craft their own narrative on that race and species. It makes the world more interesting and gives this diverse opinion. And if you aren't playing any of those races, you still might want to go through the D&D routes that we still enjoy today, which is a hero fantasy. There are bad guys and good guys, and in D&D it's easier to pick out bad versus good, and it can give people a good starting point to figure out more complex issues. And it helps us identify these evil traits so that when they do come up, when these evil actions do come up, we can fight against it in D&D and if you want to reach into our own world. So yes, there is a lot that we can gain from these evil races staying evil. And if you try to just yank out the evil from these races, it's kind of like saying, hey, we're going to yank out democracy from America, and it's going to be the exact same. It's not. There's no possible way it could be the exact same. And what wizards have kind of propositioned to do is to rework the race's culture, which is a lot of extra effort, and it doesn't add more diversity to the world. It actually takes it away. So what can we do instead of just taking away the evil races? Well, we have to look into why Wizards is doing this. And there are two reasons. The first is that a lot of the more evil inclined species or races are, well, they have a darker complexion. And I completely understand that this disproportionate representation is not very good overall. We don't want to have just all these darker complexion races be evil, but at the same point, stripping away what their culture is, their identity, and everything else is wrong. It takes away the ability for us to even compare and start to think about real world issues as well. Instead, maybe we should make the world more diverse by adding in other evil races that are of a lighter complexion, or a more fair complexion if you go in that terminology, whatever else. But we should add more races, make the world more interesting and more diverse, instead of just taking it away. Now, the second reason is the one I'm concerned that it actually is. The less noble reason is they want to just not be a part of this discussion. They don't want to be a part of thinking about races and species and what we can learn from D&D and applying it to our real world and trying to better the world in and of itself. I don't think they want to be a part of that discussion. If they do, then they would want to try to add more evil races that are not just a darker complexion, if that's the main issue, and try to make the world more interesting and diverse for everyone else out there. But what they're doing is they're trying to take more of a cowardly way out and saying, we're just going to strip away the evil and we're going to whitewash it and it'll be all clean and good and it'll be fine. And I don't think that that's a very good way to approach it, especially when you are listening to sensitivity readers. Because sensitivity readers, when they read it, the name just implies that they're going to be sensitive and not pay attention to all the complexities, for example, species versus race, what we can actually gain from it, how evil is actually a good thing in the D&D world, as well as a natural, because there are evil creatures, and just how it makes the world far more interesting and complex. But I would love to hear from you about the take that Wizards is going with on diversity. Do you agree and think that it is actually more detrimental than beneficial? Do you agree with Wizards? Why do you agree? Why do you disagree? I would love to hear your thoughts in the comments down below. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and ding that notification bell so that you will stay informed on more D&D topics and catch our next video, because we will keep making these videos. This has been Wizzo, and until next time, keep rolling.